Finally, I do have to talk about this game, Nihal versus Darda. We've been discussing the flying of the pieces. We're not going to cover that, but there's been this situation of flagging. We've seen flagging, and generally, the players accept the result. But Nihal stopped the clock with 2 seconds on his clock left. Darda, I believe he was up to about 10 seconds. So he was definitely going to get flagged in that position. He stopped the clock and he claimed a draw in a position in which his opponent still had a rook and a pawn. He had an extra bishop, but still, there are ways in which he could have lost that one. Could you give us your interpretation of this rule, and how do you see it being used in high-level competitions? And perhaps an analysis of that situation as well.
So it's interesting because these guidelines, as they call now, these used to actually be in the laws, like Section 10 of the laws, and then they were sort of moved to these guidelines at the end because now increment and delay is very prevalent in the chess world. Digital clocks have sort of advanced this aspect of it. And now the increment and delays are not specifically there just to help arbiters, right? They're there to help players finish games naturally and have them reach a natural conclusion, and that whatever increment or delay is in effect is enough for the player to finish out playing that game as best they can to get the actual correct result for that game. Now, when you're not using an increment for classical or standard chess in FIDE terms, or rapid chess in FIDE terms, there are these guidelines. Guidelines 3 is this section of the FIDE laws that everyone has probably forgotten about because nothing is ever run without an increment or a delay nowadays anyway. And they don't apply to blitz. So blitz is, I think it's considered that the clock is part of the actual game. The time management is a huge part of blitz chess. So it only refers to rapid and classical games, and you can only use this if it's actually been announced beforehand. Now, because of the issue and the appeals and people I've spoken to, it was determined that during the technical meeting, this was brought up, and they did say that these claims would be allowed. So the fact that the first time we saw it was in the Nihal Darda game was interesting because it could have been utilized by Magnus in his game against Alireza.
I just want to mention one thing, because I think it was used in one other game. I think it was Gunina against Kaneru, maybe. It was definitely a game of Guninas, and it was an equal position, but not a drawn position. And she made this claim that her opponent wasn't trying to win on the board and was trying to win on the clock, which was the case. She was flagging her. I mean, she had probably 2 seconds left when she made this claim, and the claim was rejected. And from my understanding of the position, basically she was not trying to win on the board. Like, you could just see that she was making random queen moves and random checks with the aim of eventually flagging her opponent. So how are these laws interpreted, and is it the sole or power of the arbiter to decide which position is a draw and which is not a draw?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if there's a claim made, if there's a claim made and the arbiter has to interpret, this. I just go back to the Nihal Darda game. Nihal is a bishop and a pawn up. So you've got the glossary determines this as not trying to win by normal means, or just not trying to actually win the position, right? So a normal means that it's got to be a position where reasonably the only way you're going to lose this game is by flagging. You know what I mean? So that I think in the Nihal Darda game, that is much more clear that the only way Nihal was going to lose that game was on time. And the arbiter can take a lot of things into consideration, looking at the level of the players, based on their own understanding. But yes, the arbiter is the ultimate judge in this decision. Now, US chess, where some of this stuff about adding in the guidelines. There's this option to add a clock that has a 5-second increment and give the opponent 2 minutes and let the game play out. This is very much part of what the insufficient losing chances claims aspect of US chess rules were. If the opponent didn't agree to a draw, you sort of threaten to put this 5-second increment on the game with the time remaining, but give the opponent a couple of extra minutes too, and let the game play out to a normal conclusion. If you'd have said that you were going to do that to Dada, he would have probably, I think in my estimation, said, if he has a 5-second increment, he's going to beat me in this position. Like, I'm not going to win this. I'm not going to draw this position. Like, I'm going to lose this game. So I will accept the draw. Right. So that is, that's not the aspect of this, trying to win by normal means type of claim, which is also in the same guidelines. So it's not new. It's not a new thing to those of us who were playing chess 25, 30, 40 years ago, where we never had an increment. So we've always had, there was always this aspect of the rules in play. And when I moved to the US, this insufficient losing chances thing was brand new to me, but there was a lot of times we played games without an increment of delay, and that sort of came into effect, so and you utilize that. And their definition there was that a Class C player would reasonably be expected to hold the position against a master. So you're talking about positions in my eyes that, like, he's a queen up, that type of thing. Like, he's not going to ever lose this position.
This is very subjective. This is not really
incredibly subjective, and but like I said, from the Arbiter's perspective, in my eyes, the Nihal Dada game is much more like, I agree with that claim. Like,
that game, I think that we can agree that if
but we have the same situation today. I think it was with Magnus and Anish. Anish had a position with a rook and a bishop, and Magnus had the queen. And I think Magnus offered Anish a draw, and Anish said no. And then so Magnus paused the clock and just asked the Arbiter to declare it a draw at that point. And the Arbiter did. Whereas that, to me, is much more subjective. That's not as clear. Like, I think just turning around to these guys and saying, if you think it's a draw, just go ahead and repeat a few times, might be a much better solution than just saying, declaring outright, yes, this is a draw. Because this was a queen against a rook and a bishop. Now, in their hands, yes, it's going to be, probably a draw. Like, if Magnus is saying it's a draw, and who am I to argue with that, right? I'm not.
Although, are you sure it's this game? Because like in the final, like I think I was watching the game in the final. Maybe it was another game, because in the final position, Magnus has 2.5 minutes and can repeat by at will with like queen e8.
Yeah, I just saw a video earlier today, so I thought it was from today's game. Magnus had the white pieces, and Anish had black. And yes, I
think that
there wasn't an actual repetition on the board, as far as I could tell.
But of course, Magnus, I mean, doesn't need to claim a draw on this, because he can just repeat moves. But I think this game of like Gunina against Salimova is interesting from that perspective, because like, just to give some context about the game, it's a position of queen rook and 2 pawns against queen rook and 2 pawns, and of course that is not a forced draw. But let's say we start the position on move 43, and Gunina has 36 seconds. And then the next 17 moves, the game finishes on move 60, after which she runs out of time. The pawns have stayed in the same place, and the pieces have stayed in the same place, except that Black's queen has moved around checking White's king. So nothing has changed in the last 17 moves. So the game was not declared a draw. It was declared that she lost. She made a claim with 2 seconds on the clock and this was before the Darda against Nihal game. So she had already tried this rule, and the claim was rejected. And now I can see this going either way, because it's not a forced draw for sure, and there are major pieces on the board, and White's king is vulnerable to checks. On the other hand, Black has made no progress, nor really attempted to make progress, and hasn't and it's difficult to imagine how Black could even make progress in the future, looking at the position. So
Yeah, and that's meant to be one of the main considerations is whether the person is actually trying to win the position. And if they're not trying to actually win and make progress in the position, and they are basically just trying to flag, that should be one of the key indicators that you would agree to the draw, or you would, accept the claim in that situation. The arbiter also has the option. Now, it's very difficult to do if a player makes this claim with 2 seconds left. Now, if Gunita had made the claim with 30 something seconds left and said, I don't, I'm making this claim, the arbiter has the option of allowing the game to continue and then making a ruling later based on whether he feels the opponent is trying to actually win the game or just flag the opponent. So there
But this
are
is again
many things.
even more, so like it shouldn't be the responsibility of the player to make 2 draw claims based on the same.
No, I mean, it would still be the same claim. So you would still, the claim would still be valid. It's just the arbiter is using this option to reserve judgment on the initial claim based on what he sees in the future. So it again, nobody has known about these guidelines or whatever until, they're sort of being forgotten about, right? Until this event came to the fore. And now this is a rapid event that's not using an increment or delay, and these rules are in effect. So yeah, I mean, I would hope that the arbiter team did a lot of figuring out on how they were going to handle this once it was announced that this rule was going to be in effect. I can't speak for the arbiters. I can't,
For me, this is
say what
this sounds like a very outdated rule, a rule that we used to have when we had the analog clocks.
Yeah, it's
because
exactly the same rule. Yeah.
but a rule that should have stayed with analog clocks and not be carried over to the clocks that we have right now. When you put no delay as an organizer, you're obviously looking for some type of match, some type of event, some type of situations when players don't have any seconds on the clock. To be honest, Nihal, getting a piece up in the last 5 moves of the game and then immediately claiming a draw with 2 seconds, I'm not sure he should have been awarded that draw. He didn't have enough time to make the moves. It was a time management situation, time management question, and you're penalizing the player that has used his time more efficiently. So I don't know.
I think
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions is whether the game should have actually got to that point, right? So a long time before that, when pieces were happening or whatever, I was talking about this earlier,
right,
that the arbiter should hopefully catch that first infraction and not let this type of stuff, try and nip it where it was and stop it from progressing any further. But I don't think you could blame Nihal for actually utilizing the rules and the laws that the tournament had in place and said were going to be in place, right? So
of course not.
They could have easily not announced that these guidelines were in effect and just let it play out. If that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. So
I'm not sure he, again, he got the extra piece, I believe, when he had perhaps 4 seconds on his clock. Like, he didn't have enough time to prove that he's going to be able to not lose that one. Obviously, we know Nihal being 2700, he's not going to lose that type of position. But I just feel like the player that managed his time better, which in this case was Darda,
he's also penalizing himself. He's penalizing himself a little bit if you think about it, because if he has ample time, or like I said, if you added a 5-second increment into that, he's going to win that game, right? I would put my money on him winning that ending. So he's sort of penalizing himself by agreeing to a draw at that point. It's sort of a safety net. So he doesn't get the win. He only gets a draw. Now, yes, he would have lost on time if he hadn't been able to claim that. So it's sort of a middle ground, right? This whole thing is just, remember, you're only getting a draw out of these claims. You're not getting a win. You're not, but you're not getting a win, but you're not getting a loss.
I see that. I can
but I've always dealt with these situations personally from the US chess perspective. I can honestly say I've never had to rule on this from a FIDE laws perspective, but from a US chess perspective, unless the position is very, very, very clear that this Class C player is not going to lose this against the master, I'm rejecting the claims, or I'm offering to put a delay on the game because that's one of the options too. So, if in this position, I don't think I'm accepting that a Class C player is not going to lose this against the master. Even though they're a bishop and a pawn, there's just too much can happen. I've seen too much can happen from those. So it's got to be something really, really clear cut. But like I said, the US chess version just immediately allows you to put a delay clock on the game if the player doesn't accept that it's a draw, or the master doesn't accept that it's going to be a draw, and you let the game play out naturally with that 5-second delay now in effect. So if the player feels they can go ahead and win it, they have the right to go ahead and win it, but that's the price the master pays for not accepting the draw in that, when it's being offered, when this person makes this insufficient losing chances claim. So that was sort of how we ruled it from the US chess perspective. I've never had to rule on it using the FIDE laws and their normal means definition and various things along those lines. So
I just
I
want to
certainly
offer a
don't
different
envy
perspective.
these arbiters. Yeah.
Because you mentioned you said safety net, which is sort of how I viewed that he was approaching it, which I think is a consideration, especially in a match situation like this, where he was taking the risk that he would be able to win in the amount of time he had, because he understood when he had 30 seconds left or even a minute left that there was a serious risk that he could flag, right? But he took the decision in a winning position. He was winning for nearly the entire game, that he would go for the win. And perhaps he was looking at it from a match perspective, but he wasn't able to win the game in the amount of time he had. So this was sort of a decision that he made during the game. And then he has the safety net once it's clear, once it's beyond clear that he's not going to win, as in checkmate his opponent in the amount of time that he has. And he doesn't even get close to checkmating his opponent. So it feels also like a bit of a cop out that you're able to go for the win, taking risk that you're going to run out of time, and also taking risk that you at some point maybe he was potentially could have messed the position up to losing it, right? Not at that moment, but earlier on in the game. And then once you know that you can no longer win the game, then you say, okay, I claim a draw. Even though time was always an aspect. Like both players were aware of the importance of time, even going back maybe 20 or 30 moves. And then there's also the other issue that was the final position even reached legally? Like how many of their moves were legal?
Yeah, I mean, we were saying earlier that once they get into the heat of the moment, players might not think to stop the clock and claim any of this. But Nihal was certainly, I think, always had this in the back of the mind, right? With 2 seconds left, he just very casually paused the clock and made this claim. So I think he would have, been able to easily claim that there was an illegal move or displaced pieces or anything at any particular time that happened. Yeah, I mean, once you so to touch on this, the Global Chess League state in their regulations that they use what's known as the rapid laws A2, A4, which are the full competition rules. Now, full competition rules mean if there's an illegal move or something happens, the arbiter has to step in. Like so if you don't notice an illegal move for so many moves, you still step in, you stop the clock, and you go back to when that illegal move was, you correct it, and then you penalize, and then you carry on the game from that point. So they're using these full competition rules, not the inadequate supervision laws. I don't think they have the number of excuses to not go back and deal with that and let all this thing happen. But but in terms of once I guess you've reached that position and then a player makes that claim, you're sort of obligated to just make the claim on that basis. I mean, do you want the arbiters to then go back and say, well, there was an illegal move 15 moves ago, so we're going to go back to that, and now we're going to continue the game, and give someone a minute or whatever at this point, and and carry the game from that point. I don't think that was ever going to happen. Like I said, but given that they're using the full competition rules, I think they're sort of obligated to step in and deal with an issue when it happens. And that obligation is very difficult with the time controls and everything that they've been sort of given with the format of this tournament.
Guys, I think that was, in general, a very fruitful discussion. I know we're, most of us, running out of time right now, so we're going to have to close it right about now. But thank you, Chris, for joining us. That was very insightful. Fabi, as always, a pleasure. And let us know what you think, the audience. What do you guys think are the responsibilities of a chess arbiter? What do you think should have been done better in the game between Nihal and Darda? Obviously, the discussion is open. Magnus also gave us his point of view about that one. One thing is for sure, it does seem like Nihal might have been the only one paying attention to the technical meeting. So kudos to him for that one. He knew the rules. But yeah, that's more or less everything we have for this episode. Once again, Chris, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Cheers.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.